Like I said, again, it's an honor to have you on this platform. For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Michael Gerrard. I'm a professor at Columbia Law School, where I teach courses on environmental law, energy regulation, and climate change law. And I founded and direct the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. Now I can ask you, when did you develop this passion for law? Is this something you always wanted to do when you were younger, or did you kind of get into it later in life?
Well, actually, I started, but my passion for the environment began before my passion for law. I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia, which is a town dominated by the petrochemical industry. And that got me, and it was a very polluted town, and that's what got me interested in the environment in the first place. Um, I started out wanting to be a journalist, but after college, I worked for an environmental group for a couple of years, and it seemed to me that the most interesting and most impactful work on the environment was being done by lawyers. And so I entered law school with the um, intent to become an environmental lawyer, and that's what I did.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. That's amazing. You had mentioned some of the courses that you teach. I wanted to ask you now, what is this the reception of the students? Are they open to this information in terms of fighting to change the environment?
Oh, absolutely. I find a great deal of interest among the students here. And not only in the law school, some of my classes are open to undergraduates and to graduate students from other parts of the university. Columbia, a couple of years ago, started a whole new school, the Climate School, dedicated just to climate change issues. And we've had an enormously positive reception to that. There's tremendous interest.
Wow, okay, that's really good to hear. Now I can ask you about that a little bit. So you founded and directed the Saving Center for Climate Change Law. What exactly is that, and what was your role?
So when I joined the Columbia faculty in 2009, I started it up. And the notion was and continues to be we develop legal techniques to fight climate change. We train the next generation of lawyers to use those techniques. And we develop legal uh, research resources that are used by lawyers and judges and advocates around the world. So, for example, we maintain um, uh, the database of all the climate change lawsuits in the world, and there are now, uh, around 3,000 of them that have happened. And so anyone who is involved in climate law or climate litigation uses our database to see who's suing who about what and what the outcomes have been and so forth.
Wow, okay, okay. Now I can ask you, from your perspective, since you have access to these records and things like that, does it appear that things are getting worse, or are they getting better, or are they kind of, staying the same?
Well, there have been a series of very good decisions from courts all over the world on climate change. We've had very positive decisions from places as diverse as the Netherlands and Nepal and India and South Korea and Germany and France and Brazil and Mexico um, and other countries. So there's this global growth of judicial decisions calling for more action on climate change. Having said that, if what you're asking is the climate getting better or worse, it's getting worse. We continue to move in the wrong direction. We're not on track to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. But that's one major reason there's so much litigation. That when governments are not doing enough to fight climate change, people go to the courts to try to force them to do more, and that's met with some success, not nearly enough. We're still not yet on the right track, but I think that um, uh, litigation and other legal techniques are helping to move the needle.
Okay, okay. Now I can ask you, in terms of America, do you feel like things are and controlled by the government? Is that the biggest like roadblock, or is it something more the responsibility of individual people that we can do, to help combat this climate change?
Well, I think the most important thing is government policy, steady government policy to move us away from fossil fuels and toward clean energy. Each individual should play their own role and try to reduce our own consumption. But I think the most important uh, things that need to be done would be government policies at the federal and the state and the local level to move away from fossil fuels and toward clean energy.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Now I can ask you. Now you have a book, Global Climate Change and U.S. Law. What inspired you to write that book, and about how long did it take you to actually put that together?
I started working on it in 2005 while I was still practicing law full time in a law firm. And I recruited about 25 lawyers around the country to write chapters for it. Um, I saw that climate change was an emerging, very important issue, but there wasn't any one place where you could find comprehensive information about U.S. law. So I decided that would be useful. But by the time I started working on that book, I had already published, I think, 6 other books. So I was used to doing that. It was only about 2 years between the time I started working on the book and the time it was published. And things have happened so quickly that we came out with a second edition in 2014 and a third edition just last year.
Okay. Okay. Now, what about are you working on any books currently, or do you have any books coming in the future?
Uh, I've been working for quite some time on a book about how um, the law will need to cope with a much hotter planet. We're seeing more heat waves, wildfires, extreme flooding, other kinds of events, and trying to work through how the law needs to change in order to cope with those conditions. And I've been, publishing a chapter at a time, but this is an ongoing project.
Okay, okay. Now I can say, at least for the last few decades, you hear a lot about global warming. Now, how serious is that, and how far away are we from, having to deal with that planet that has a much higher temperature?
We're already having to deal with that. We're already seeing unprecedented heat and other events. The scientific report just came out that August of 2024 was the hottest year in recorded history. They started taking measurements around 1880. Um, it's already having a negative impact. One way that it's often measured is uh, the average temperature globally above pre-industrial conditions, and we're now around maybe 1.3 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is already having big impacts. At the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015 um, said that the goal ought to be 2 degrees, but they called for studies to see whether that was good enough. The small island states said we want 1.5 degrees because at 2 degrees we're underwater. So this big study was done by a group called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it said indeed we need to stay within 1.5 degrees, or else real terrible things happen. It now looks like, I'm sorry to say, we're going to go past the 1.5 degrees, and real question whether we can stay to 2 degrees. So temperatures keep on going up. The impacts keep on getting worse. So it's a very, very serious issue. And the law is one of the several tools that need to be deployed to attack that.
Okay, okay. This is very, very important information, and I feel like the average person may take it for granted. The repercussions that may come in the next decade or decades to come. So have you ever thought about doing like a documentary based on your research or any of your books?
Um, No, I mean there are a lot of documentaries around that. That's not my skill set, but I like to concentrate more on the legal part, which is what I know.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I understand that. Now I can ask you about a few of different positions that you have held. Now, you were the chair of the American Bar Association section of Environment, Energy, and Resources. What was your role, and what were you responsible for?
So that's a group that at the time when I was chair, which was around 2004 and 2005, had about 10,000 members, lawyers all around the country who work on energy and environmental issues. They work from all different perspectives. Some are in private practice, some in environmental groups, some in government. They don't necessarily agree on the substantive issues, but we put on a lot of educational programs. We publish books. We do studies. So it's a way of keeping the profession informed and trying to advance development of the law.
Okay, okay. Now I can ask you this. I'm a world traveler, so I've been to like 70 countries and I go to different countries and I've noticed like, say like you'll go, I'm in Ghana currently. I was in Rwanda and I was in Tanzania and they'll institute rules and they'll say, well, you can't bring plastic bags here and they'll take them from you. They'll tell you not to bring them, but if they find them in your luggage or if you're carrying them, they'll take them. And then when you go to the grocery stores, they don't use them. Are things like that really effective if countries do that?
It's helpful. It doesn't change everything, but every little bit helps. Um, One thing about climate change is that every ton of greenhouse gas that goes into the atmosphere is likely to stay there for decades or centuries and do some harm. So every ton we can keep out of the atmosphere, every ton of carbon dioxide and methane and so forth we can keep out of the atmosphere is a positive contribution.
Okay, okay. Well, that's good to hear. Now, I could say myself, I started an urban garden. So, like, I live in Cleveland. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and they have a lot of, I guess, dilapidated properties, abandoned homes, and they'll eventually knock them down. But over time, these empty spaces, they'll become like miniature landfills. People would dump trash, tires, weapons, all kind of stuff in them. So I have like 3 plots now. I'll bound and I'll landscape them and I'll transform it into an urban garden. Create a beehive and grow different fruits and vegetables. So that's something that would inspire me to do more as well.
Good for you. That's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Now I can ask you, what do you feel like? Is the what do you feel like is the biggest difficulty that you face when you try to, I guess, get people to understand the severity of climate change? Are they receptive to it, like just average everyday people?
Unfortunately, tragically, I'd say there's become a partisan divide on that issue in the United States. Democrats tend to believe in this, and Republicans tend not to. And so there are some people who it's easy to persuade, and some people it's not easy to persuade. But certainly the outcome of the election coming up in November will have enormous consequences. Where this country is going to facing a fork in the road, and depending on who wins the election in November, both the White House and Congress will go sharply in one direction or sharply in another direction.
Okay, okay. Now I can ask you, if it's okay to ask you, do you feel like either side has been more, um, I guess, efficient in combating the climate change, or things like that, or are they both kind of on the same level?
Oh no, they're completely opposite. President Obama, his government introduced um, a lot of very important environmental regulations to fight climate change and other environmental hazards. President Trump's administration did everything it could to repeal them and advance the development of coal and oil and natural gas. The Biden administration has, uh, uh, tried to bring back what Trump took away and go beyond what the Obama administration had done. If President Trump is reelected in November, it's very clear that he will again halt the progress we're making on climate change and on moving away from fossil fuels. Whereas if Vice President Harris wins, she'll continue what the Biden-Harris administration did and move beyond it. So it's a very stark choice.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, what are some of the alternatives to using fossil fuels? If you have, already went into it a little bit.
Well, wind and solar are the two most prominent. We also have hydroelectricity. We have geothermal. And there's a lot of discussion of nuclear. There's still about 93 operating nuclear power plants in the United States, but almost all of them are very old and may not last that much longer. But there's a lot of research on developing new, smaller reactors called small modular nuclear reactors. None of them have yet been built at a commercial scale, but there's a lot of R&D going into it, and there are hopes that in the next decade or so we'll be able to have those, that they'll operate safely and be additional sources of emissions-free electricity.
Okay. Now we're about 17 minutes in, so now I can ask you, do you feel like with the change in technology, do you feel like there has been an increase of people becoming more socially aware and wanting to be more involved in this change?
Again, there's a partisan divide on this. But there are certainly a lot more people, especially young people, who are really inspired to work on these issues. And social media certainly help that. But there's a lot of social media that is going in the wrong direction, that is sending out false information about climate, about clean energy, and so forth. So it's a very mixed bag.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that, because you see so many things online and you really don't know what to believe, So I really appreciate the work that you've been doing, and I definitely look forward to the work that you have done. You're informing a lot of people, and hopefully, we can make them changes and get it done.
Great. Well, I've enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you very much for the
Right. I
opportunity.
really appreciate you. All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.